We just want to start by taking a moment to highlight our code of conduct. So our aim is to foster a community that is open to all and strives to be friendly and patient, welcoming, considerate, and respectful. Over to the next slide, please, Chris. Our agenda for this evening, so I'm doing the introductions and some general housekeeping, and then I'm going to hand over to our very own Chris Reddington for his talk. We'll wrap up at around 8 with some Q&A and networking. Next slide, please, Chris. So we're really happy to see so many of you this evening. If you are willing to support the Azure Thames Valley Meetup group and present something to the community, or if you happen to know a good speaker who would be, then please submit your session via our Sessionize page. I will share the link in this Teams chat a little bit later. We also want to continue to grow our community. So if you know any Thames Valley locals who would be interested in joining our group, then please go ahead and share our website and social media details with them. Again, I'll share all of these links in the Teams chat. And then finally, if you happen to know of any local businesses who may want to support us, then please point them in our direction. We'd love to have a chat with them. Next slide is me handing over to Chris for his talk on how GitHub can help in planning, building, and deploying a podcast or blog site. Over to you, Chris.
Excellent. Thank you, Alicia. Let me just switch slides over here now. And here we almost go. There we go. So just checking everyone can hear me loud and clear and all okay. Excellent. I'm seeing a nod there, which is good. So just to kind of introduce the topic, to introduce the session we're going to have today. This is a talk that I've done at a few different meetup groups now. GitHub and static websites and podcasting and blogging is a passion area of mine, so you'll see all of that shine through as we go through the content here this evening. But please be interactive, please ask questions. This session is for all of yourselves. I'll be honest, there are already recordings online of this talk, so I want to make sure that this is valuable for all of you here this evening. So if there are questions along the way, if there are things that you want to explore more and you want me to go off track and talk about some other things, let's go crazy, let's go wild, let's absolutely go and do it, because I'm more than happy to go off book and see where we end up. So I do apologize if there's any background noise at all. Like most people, I am melting today with the heat that we're getting. I've got my fan on, I've got the window open. I do live on a main road, so if needs be, I can shut that if it's a distraction at all. So just let me know, give me a shout in the chat or jump off mute at any point. So first off then, who am I? Chris Reddington. I think a lot of people will know me by now, but just in case this is your first time coming to the meetup group, I'm one of the meetup group organizers here of Azure Thames Valley as well. So that's one of the things I do outside of the day job. But in terms of my day job, I am a cloud solution architect at Microsoft. That is the thing I do day to day. So working with customers, helping them move their workloads, their applications onto Azure. But in my spare time, one of the things that I do is I'm a blogger, I'm a vlogger. I also do a lot of podcasting as well. And yes, don't ask me how I fit all of that into my time. I have no idea. I haven't learned the skill. And if I did learn how to share that skill on, I certainly would. That would make a great meetup talk or maybe even a TED talk. So if you aren't following me yet, would love to gain some extra followers along the way. So on Twitter, I'm at RedoBowen, just on the top of the screen there. I am Cloud with Chris over on YouTube as well. As always looking for subscribers, and hopefully this will encourage you to join the band of followers that I'm growing. In the spare time, I like to do some musical theatre. So I'm a musical theatre enthusiast. I do some improvising as well. Haven't had the chance to do that in such a long time because of COVID rules and everything going on. Hopefully that'll be a chance to do a little bit more of that. And as Alicia mentioned, we of course have a great community. We're growing here, so please do take the time to support the community. We are trying to grow and make this an even more thriving community. I think one of the reflections we had is that we do see a bit of changing amongst people who join the different sessions. We'd love to get a regular group of folks that rally along. We know it's not the same as being in person. We absolutely acknowledge that, but we're hoping, fingers crossed, if everything goes well with the country, we can get some in-person things going along soon. So fingers crossed. One change from the previous meetup, which would have been last month, worth calling out, is we have a different LinkedIn page. So we previously had a private group. We now have a public page. The link is at the bottom of the screen there. Please do take a look at that because, again, we are trying to encourage more people just to get involved in the community here.
I've also just shared that link in the chat.
Awesome.
The new LinkedIn page.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So, folks, this is where we get audience participation. Otherwise, it's going to be a really boring session, and I'm going to deliver stuff which is not of value to anyone, and that is absolutely not what I want here. So I'd love just to know, and please jump off mute if you are able and willing to do so. I'd love to know, how is your experience with Azure, with GitHub, Github Actions, this thing called Hugo, which you may not know about what that is right now. You'll hopefully know by the end of this discussion here. Would you say you're beginner, intermediate, advanced? How would you rate yourselves with all of those topics? Feel free to jump off mute and let me know, folks. And I promise I won't move on until I have some audience participation, so we'll be here a while.
So, Chris, I've got to say advanced for Azure, or I'm in trouble. But everything else, I'm beginner. Recently started looking back into GitHub. Did programming at uni. GitHub's changed an awful lot since then. God knows how many years ago it was. So yeah, big beginner and all the cool stuff.
Awesome. And thanks for joining, Nicola. Good to have you.
No bother. So I feel like I've infiltrated it because I can't even get away with it in my Scottish accent. But yeah, no, good to see the session.
All good. Yes, I can see beginner, intermediate in Azure, Git beginner, Azure admin. Awesome. Stephen, I can see you're off mute there. I'll pick on you as well.
Oh dear. I'd say intermediate on all but Hugo, which is not used it.
Cool. Okay, beginner in GitHub, pretty early usage with a few repos and demo projects. Cool, excellent. So it sounds like we're all in the kind of intermediate beginner stages of GitHub, GitHub Actions, Hugo, maybe a bit more intermediate to advanced with the Azure side. Cool. That's good. It always helps knowing where people are coming from before we dive right in and confuse everybody. So let's talk about then what we'll be talking about this evening. Really, we'll be kind of going on the journey that I've been on with my own website for Cloud with Chris. So I use GitHub, probably no surprise given the topic of the talk here. So we'll first kind of kick off with the core features of GitHub, what they are, why they might be important to you in any project, but how I use them for Cloud with Chris. Understanding some of the fundamental concepts of GitHub Actions. So really just, again, could apply to any kind of deployment that you would go and do or build with GitHub Actions. And then what we'll do as well is we've done a bit of an extension to this talk today, because normally we have a bit of a session in the beginning with some, what's gone on in Azure recently. We thought rather than do that, let's actually go a bit deeper into some of these things that I do with Cloud with Chris today and make it a bit more interesting. So changing things up a bit there. So that'll be a bit different. Again, how you can use some of the existing samples that are there and available today to deploy to Azure, some of the great learning resources that are out there, like Microsoft Learn, for example. And then just understanding how and why I use GitHub Actions to deploy Cloud with Chris as well, because there's obviously things like Azure DevOps out there, there's GitLab, there's Jenkins, there's many other tools. What was it about GitHub Actions for me with Cloud with Chris and GitHub overall that I decided to go down that path? So that's what we're going to be talking about today here. And again, any questions throughout, feel free to jump off mute. I'm more than happy to be interrupted as many times as we like going through this session. So please do take me up on that. Good. So then it's probably worth us just talking about a bit of a history here for a moment. I think Nicola mentioned a moment ago about using GitHub back in university. So I think one of the things to call out first is a lot of people think of GitHub as this brand new shiny thing. GitHub is not new. GitHub was actually founded back in 2008, so 13 years ago now. And really, Microsoft became a significant user of GitHub in around 2012. If you think about some of the repositories that Microsoft started bringing along to GitHub, I think .NET Core was the big first kind of planting the flag in the sands there that people think of with Microsoft and open source. And it wasn't until 2018, so only 3 years ago now, that Microsoft actually invested and became the owner of, I guess, of GitHub. $7.5 billion. That's not really cash I have stored aside, unfortunately, but a big investment there from Microsoft in GitHub. And I think what you see there is Microsoft really showcasing and showing that actually open source is an area that they see the future in. They see really the recognition that it needs to be nurtured and developed. And I think when you look over the past few years since Microsoft has owned GitHub as well, really an investment has gone into there as well. And we'll talk about that, I think, on the next slide. But just as this timeline shows here, you could see that from kind of 2019, for example, GitHub started offering unlimited private repositories. So for anyone who may not be a developer, is wondering what on earth is this thing called a repository here, or what is Git and how does it compare to GitHub? A version control repository is effectively somewhere where you store your code. You can go and version it over time. You can go and kind of store your history of changes. So if you wanted to roll back to a different change, maybe see who committed different changes or who committed a certain line of code, for example, a version control enables you to go and do that. Git is a type of version control source that you can go and use, and GitHub is a provider that implements Git, and you can host your Git repositories on GitHub. That's the link between all of these. So GitHub actually started offering unlimited private repositories to all plans in 2019, so January of 2019. And that was a big deal because before then, I think you had a limit of around 5, if memory serves me right. So if you wanted to store code but not have it out in the open so anyone could go and see it, you would have to go and pay for that. So if you've got your pet projects that you're working on, like many of us techies do, it was out in the open and maybe you weren't quite ready to go and share that with everyone yet. Later on then in September of 2019, GitHub acquired a company called Semel. We'll talk a little bit about Semel a bit later because they were a great acquisition, in my opinion, from GitHub. Semel basically do a lot around security analysis, code analysis. So if you've heard about tools like Dependabot, for example, and we'll probably see Dependabot in action a bit later as well, or things like CodeQL, for example. And again, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Some great tools to bring security into your development lifecycle. A lot of people hear of the term kind of star ops. So, your NetOps, your SecOps, your DevOps, your DevSecOps, really bringing security into that development lifecycle. So again, great acquisition. We'll talk a bit about that later here. And then in March 2020, which, can you believe it, was over a year ago? 2020 does not feel like over a year ago. Time has compressed and somehow been so long. I don't understand it. But GitHub announced they were acquiring NPM and has now acquired NPM, in fact. So you're seeing, again, this series of acquisitions from GitHub. I think there have probably even been more since I've last updated my slides. I'd need to go back and check. But then in April 2020, that free plan that I mentioned a bit earlier with the private repositories, there was a limit on the number of collaborators you could have on those private repositories. Now that limit is gone, you can have an unlimited amount of collaborators on your private repositories. So you can just really see here how there's this investment to bring people into GitHub and use it as your platform of choice for hosting your Git repositories. You also get 2,000 minutes of GitHub Actions per month, something that will be very beneficial with what we're talking about here this evening. And just as a bit of fun, and I'll drop the link in the chat here, I'll just type it out, do a bit of multitasking. This was a a open source project that I spotted when I was kind of preparing this talk quite a while ago now. All about finding the day and the time that you joined, not the time, but the date that you joined GitHub. So Nicola, you can go and find out when it was that you joined GitHub using that link. I joined back in 2011, May of 2011. So I am 10 years old in GitHub speak, which I think was kind of an awesome fact. I did tweet about that when I turned 10 because it was my birthday after all. So talking about GitHub then, we've talked about the fact that GitHub is a place you can go and store your Git source control, your Git repositories. But it is so much more than that. And I really want to stress that. If you take one thing away from today's talk, please let it be that GitHub is more than just Git. It does so much more now these days. During this talk, we will be focusing on all the areas here which have the arrows beneath them. So the collaborative coding, automation and CI/CD, and project management. We'll be focusing on those areas here. But as I say, GitHub does so much more than those three areas that we'll be focusing on today. When you think about security, for example, you have private repositories. We've talked about those already. You have things like two-factor authentication. I think we're all seeing in the modern world that we're living in that just having a username and a password is not enough. You want to go ahead and have some kind of extra token that you can go and provide with your phone or some other device, for example. That is built into the platform. The code scanning capabilities that are built into the platform, secret scanning, being able to even query your code. So I mentioned a bit earlier about something called CodeQL. So you've all heard of SQL, structured query language. Think about CodeQL as a way to query your code for potential vulnerabilities. So imagine being able to just query a code base, which is like hundreds of thousands of lines long, looking for certain patterns of code, being able to understand, right, is that a potential vulnerability? Have we actually mitigated against that? Or is that potentially an area that could be injected in, or is potentially, some vulnerable path in our code base? That is what CodeQL does. It's a really awesome set of technology. Probably won't go into depth in it today, but I can show just an example of it running in a GitHub action here. Dependency reviews, for example, are something that you can do within GitHub straight away. Dependabot. So no one likes maintaining code, right? No one likes to keep up to date all the things that they've worked on in the past. We all like working on the brand new shiny things. I'm definitely like, is it the dog from Up that kind of looks and goes squirrel and new shiny thing? I am like that. I know other developers that are like that. We're all, I'm sure we all have that kind of way of working with code. And Dependabot is there to help us manage that again. So I'll show you that in one of the repositories that I have lying around as well here. Client apps, there is actually a GitHub mobile app now as well. You can absolutely do pull requests, code reviews, commits on the go. I have done it. It works. It's a really strange concept when you're on a bus or whatever and just reviewing some pull request changes, but you can do it. I promise it works. Git is more than just working alone, and development is more than just working on your own. It's about working as a team. So the project management pieces we'll be covering a bit later as well. But part of that is about managing your team overall. And there's some great functionality there to manage organizations inside of GitHub and the teams that make up those organizations. So if you are an enterprise, if you're coming to this talk from more of a enterprise angle and thinking about your own IT organization and your development organization, there are absolutely those pieces in place that you can do to manage those teams and manage the organization as well. Different flavors of GitHub as well. GitHub Enterprise, github.com. So there may be different options. And if you're interested in exploring that further, drop me a message afterwards, and I'm more than happy to chat further on that. But more importantly, and I think the obvious elephant in the room here, the place where GitHub absolutely came from is the open source world. So it would be wrong not to call out community. There is, of course, GitHub Marketplace, where anyone can go and publish things like GitHub Actions. I've actually got a GitHub action, for example. I haven't quite published it yet, but it's ready to be published. GitHub Sponsors, for example, is a way that you can go and sponsor open source maintainers for the projects they work on. I cannot imagine a single developer these days who has not interacted with some kind of open source project, whether that is actually contributing into that or even using it in one of your own projects. And showing some love to our open source contributors and maintainers is no bad thing. So there is actually a way built into GitHub to actually go and sponsor developers as well, which I think is absolutely awesome. So we'll be focusing on these 3 ones, as I say, with the arrows here: collaborative coding, automation, CI/CD, and project management. So we won't dwell on those too much here because we'll talk all about those later on here. So just out of curiosity, feel free to come off mute. Feel free to type in the chat however you feel most comfortable. Of these logos that you see on screen here, which one of these have you heard of most? Have you not heard of any of them at all? If I said the word static site generator, would you have a clue what on earth I am talking about here? And spoiler warning, you saw Hugo mentioned. Indeed, yes, Peter. And hello, good evening, good afternoon, I think, for you, Peter. I have mentioned Hugo a few times. Yes, I have mentioned it a few times on previous recordings, etc. as well.
Hi, Chris. Is that Markdown on the bottom left?
Bottom left is actually View Press, I believe, from memory. But okay. You've spotted a good theme amongst all of these, Yaz. So good call out there is that all of these are ways of converting Markdown into some kind of site. So spot on there with the observations. So kudos for that. So heard of all 3, but not used. Heard of static site generators, but none of the tools. Excellent, excellent. So we've definitely got the right audience here then. So all of these are different types of static site generators. So you've got Hugo, which you will see as we go through this talk, I have a bias for because I use it on my own site. Not to say that it's any better than any of the others here. They're all great tools and great frameworks you can go and use. My personal opinion, I think it is better than any of the others, purely because it has such a great community that surrounds it. And I can talk more about that as we go through as well. There are some great community contributors that really want to make that such an awesome platform to go and use. Hugo happens to be based on Go. I think Jekyll is based on Ruby, if memory serves me right. Gatsby, I can't remember what it's based on, but you've got ViewPress, which is based on Vue, and you've got a number of others that I haven't even put on the slide here. So as Yaz correctly observed there, really these static site generators are about converting something which is an easy kind of simple format for us to understand, converting it into something which is what we would view on the internet, so a website. So converting this Markdown into HTML, into CSS, into the JavaScript that render into the website that you eventually see on your page when you go to www.cloudwithchris.com or wherever it may be. So talking about cloudwithchris.com then, I'm not going to go into much depth on this here today at all. I've got another flavor of this talk, which is more about the Azure infrastructure and the architecture. And if folks are interested, we can absolutely do another session on this another time. But just to give you a flavor of what we're talking about here, we talked about the this term static site generator. And I just want to focus on those first 2 words, static site. So what does static site actually mean? Well, I've kind of given you that detail already. It's about the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript that render into that website that you go and view. But does that mean that actually, hey, Chris, if I wanted to search for something on your site, I can't go and search on your site anymore? It's just static content. It's never going to change. That's not quite what it means. And like I said, I've got another flavor of that talk where we talk all about this. But the key thing to remember here, just bear in mind when you look at this architecture, where do you see any app services? Where do you see any Kubernetes clusters? Where do you see any virtual machines? Any of that typical infrastructure, which is a little more costly because of the compute that is running under the covers effectively, where do you see that on this architecture? You don't. It's not there. It is not there, part of my architecture. So all of my hosting is done on Azure Storage, Azure CDN, and Azure DNS. That is it. And I will show you my bill a little bit later. I pay less than £5 a month for all of that you see on screen running. My production environment, my staging environment, my preview environment, my everything that gets streamed to Apple Podcast, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. I pay less than £5 a month for all of that infrastructure. Yes, there is an elephant in the room. I could use static web apps, and I am going to move to static web apps at some point. But I'm a firm believer in if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So at the moment, everything's working for me. It's not the highest thing on my priority list, so I haven't quite gotten to migrating that across just yet. But if I were starting all this again, I'll be honest, the basis of a lot of this talk, you probably wouldn't even need to worry about, because a lot of it is done for you with static web apps. So definitely worth taking a look at static web apps if you're starting your journey with this here as well. So that's as much slides as I want to do for the time being. Now we're just going to be completely interactive, completely demo driven. So this is the point. If you want to go off piste, if you want to go ahead and dive into certain aspects or certain areas, please shout out. Just to call out, there's a question from Stephen in the chat. Are static web apps out of preview now? Yes, they are. They went out of preview, I think it was the week before build, so about two and a bit months now. There's 2 tiers. You've got a free tier, and you've got, I think it's called a standard tier, if memory serves me right. So you could even get started for free. The free one comes without an SLA, but there's some great benefits to that. And if we have some time, maybe we can explore that in today's session as well. But yes, absolutely out of preview. So definitely get using it now, generally available. So I'm just going to go ahead and zoom in just to make sure everyone can definitely see the screen here. Okay. So this is my website, cloudwithchris.com. You can see it looks, feels, and tastes just like any other website that you would go and view on the internet, right? You would not think that it's not running on servers. Like, I'm looking through this. There's a load of links. I can go and look at some other content. For example, I like gaming. Maybe that's an episode I want to go and watch. I can go and click on stuff and listen to the podcast back in real time, for example. I can go and interact with other content. Here we go. And I've just navigated to someone else's site there, which is fine. You know, all of that kind of stuff I can go and do. But notice as I browse around my site here, Cloud with Chris, just how quick everything is loading, right? None of this has been pre-cached on my machine. I could even go ahead, if you all really want me to, and go into a private browser and just show you. You can just see how quick everything is loading up here. You know, I've not got any loading times. Even if I go ahead and search, just how quick. That is the real thing that I really want to emphasize with static websites, is just the performance that you can get from these is truly, truly awesome. So because of the combination of using Azure Storage, could do the same with static web apps, but because I'm using that with Azure CDN, I can get this really amazingly performant website here. You know, I'm not relying on virtual machines or compute like that. Because the website is static in nature, the content doesn't need to be, you know, dynamically rendered on the fly or anything like that. We can get this website, which is actually really performant and really cheap to run. And those are 2 characteristics that for me as a pet project from something I run in my spare time, I absolutely love. And I've got users who are based in Australia. I've got listeners who are based in America, you know, from India, for example, from here in the UK. I need that website to be performant for everyone, not just a select few. You know, one of the things I care deeply about is that my website is accessible for everyone. And load times are a big, important piece of that. So static websites, along with Azure Storage, Azure CDN, or alternatively static web apps, enable me to do that. So all of this, again, just looks and feels like any other website that you would go and view. You would have no idea, unless I told you, which I already have, that this is made by Hugo and on a static website here. So what I've done is I've just gone ahead and changed tabs here. You may have noticed, but nothing looks particularly different. Again, just the same old website, right? Not quite. This one is actually my staging website, so my preview website. So as I'm releasing my content, I'm not going to release it all in one big drop. I stage things just like normal kind of development projects. You know, I've got a cycle for my content to go out because I don't want it all to go out on one day. I've got phases that I kind of release my content in. So this is where I kind of go to showcase what my content is before it goes live to the world, if that makes sense. And again, this is just another Azure CDN endpoint, which is pointing to another Azure Blob Storage backend. Just as simple as that. And you'll see how this fits in with my kind of release process with GitHub Actions a little bit later. But this is just some context I just wanted to set before we dive into the GitHub side of things. And the final one before we dive into GitHub is this area as well. And this is one of the areas where I love static web apps, because this I had to build myself. This I had to go and deploy myself. All of this stuff that you see here, like staging environments where you want to kind of test changes, see your content before it goes out, and just understand some changes, that is all built into static web apps. You get that as part of the service. This I had to kind of craft and figure out the logic to how I can kind of deploy this and see those changes and not impact other areas all myself. So that is just something you just get as part of static web apps. And that is the key difference between, using Azure Storage as your static site host versus static web apps. Static web apps is really a platform built around static websites. Azure Storage is built around storage. It just happens you can host static content on it. So that would be the two differences I would call out there. So again, you can go into one of these folders. We can go take a look at the page there, and then we could go and see, this is a previous version of my site. You can see the different color scheme, some of the older content there, for example. But yes, you can see the kind of previous releases of the site. So with all that context then, let's focus on the GitHub side, because that is really what the focus is of the talk here this evening. So we're about 5 past here, so we've got another 55 minutes. Again, feel free to interrupt at any point if there's any questions, because I suspect this is the area where we'll start getting some questions raised. So Cloud with Chris, I've got my own GitHub organization. I have a few different repositories underneath that. One of those is private. 2 of those are public. And one of my aims as I go forward with Cloud with Chris is I'm going to open source everything that I kind of work on. So everything that I have to build to make Cloud with Chris kind of work, I'm going to be open sourcing in that repository if anyone's interested. So cloudwithchris.com, you can see absolutely everything in here about the website. So to Yaz's point a little bit earlier about using YAML and Markdown, for example, that is absolutely what is available in this repository. So if I go to my content folder, if I go to one of my episodes and find the episode that I released this morning, in fact, which is it's always fun trying to find a item in a list, is this one right here. So an episode on continuous integration. And you can see if I just look at the edited file here, this is just Markdown, right? Nothing special about it at all. I've got some front matter here just as the metadata that Hugo uses to render certain things on my website. I've got a description here. And what that ultimately becomes is a page on my website. So you can see here we've got the title, we've got the date that it was published, we've got some tags, for example, we've got the YouTube video embedded, we've got the description, we've even got the kind of audio player here where I can click on any word and listen in real time to the podcast as well. So all of that comes together because I built a theme for my website, and then what is done as part of my build process is Hugo builds that website by using the theme combined with the content, builds all of that, compiles it into a series of HTML, CSS, images, JavaScript, the like, which then get pushed to Azure Storage. And that is ultimately how this magic works. I'm not writing HTML every day to build those pages. All I'm doing is editing a Markdown file, just like I would edit if I was contributing to the Azure Docs, for example. So again, you can see, for example, that this is just a series of Markdown files here for my episodes. You'll notice, for example, that one of the talks that I have listed is tonight's talk. So we'll go and edit that as we go through. We'll do a bit of a live kind of walkthrough of making a change to the website here tonight. So All Markdown files, that is the magic behind how I go and manage and maintain my website. So let's focus on the GitHub side of things for just a moment here. So of course, the pages we've been looking at so far are all version control, are all the code and the source repository side of things, if you like. So you'll see here, for example, we're in Cloud with Chris, cloudwithchris.com. So you'll notice that in the URL here. At the top of the screen, you'll see we've got a few different tabs. So code, issues, pull requests, actions, projects, security insights, and settings. We'll explore most of those throughout this evening. And first off, we will go ahead and take a look at issues. So issues are a way of, as the name implies, originally we're managing different issues that arose with your project. So things like bugs, for example, things like features that you might need to go and work on are effectively issues. So you can see in my own repository here, if I just start slowly scrolling down, I use issues to actually manage the backlog of content for my blogs, for my podcasts, for all of the content that I'm working on with Cloud with Chris. So you can see, for example, I've got various episode suggestions. I've got various blogs that I'm going to be working on. I've got various series of individual pieces of content that I'll be working on here. And I can go and click on one of those, for example, and I can go and see when the recording is scheduled. A bit of fun there. I actually have a Logic app to populate this stuff. So I generate it all based on my own calendar. I don't actually input stuff directly into GitHub Issues. Lots of automation going on here. But you can see, for example, I can go and start interacting with folks here. I can go and start having a comment history going on here, etc. Now, to one of the points that I mentioned in the very beginning about why did I choose GitHub over something like GitLab, over something like Azure DevOps or Bitbucket, Jira, and the like, a combination of different technologies. The reason I chose GitHub specifically for my scenario is my platform, Cloud with Chris, is all about contributing to the community. It's all about contributing back and giving back to people and building content for others to go and digest and consume. And the hope and the aim is that people will come back to the repository and suggest new topics and suggest ideas for Cloud with Chris that I could go and publish. So being open, developing in the open, contributing into the open is something really important for me, is something part of what I'm aiming to do with it all, which is why all of my backlog is out in the open. So if people want to go and take a look at the backlog and spot something that is of interest to them, they can go and react to the GitHub issue there and upvote it. They can go ahead and comment or raise a new issue, for example. You can go ahead to do that, and that's something I can then treat a bit like an open source project. Now, I, for one, am not a big fan of just managing a whole big list of issues. Like, I don't like big, long lists. It doesn't really work well with me. I'm more of a visual person. So that's a good thing because GitHub issues and GitHub project boards relate effectively back to each other. So you can add GitHub issues to your GitHub projects. So you can see here we've got this episode roadmap, for example. And we can see here we've got a few different columns. We've got our to-do, our in progress, and our done. So for example, I could go ahead and drag that because that is coming up in the next couple of weeks, as is this one. That one is actually filmed yesterday, so is now in the process of being edited. So you can see, I can start being visual and using my typical kind of Kanban approach, if you think things that way, being able to drag and drop these cards across these different columns. You can go ahead and filter on those cards as well. So I could go ahead, for example, and filter based upon whether something is open or whether it is closed, for example, or who may have actually gone and created that, whether there's a pull request linked to it, what milestone it's a part of, because you may have noticed that all of my different issues have different milestones tagged with them. So if we jump back to the issues again here, you'll notice that we have both labels and both milestones as well. So we can go ahead, for example, click on the main series and take a look what episodes are coming up in the main series and maybe the things that are on the backlog, not yet prioritized for a release yet. Maybe take a look at the things that are coming up in the July milestone, for example, and I can start being realistic. Well, okay, I have released that one already, and I can go ahead and mark that one as closed. And just being realistic about, am I going to meet all of the things that I've said that I'm going to go and meet? And do I need to push things further back in the project there? Now, for anyone that's following GitHub, it's probably worth calling out, and I'll try and share a link a little bit later here as I don't have it to hand. There is a big preview coming of GitHub Issues, actually, a kind of a revamped, fresh version of GitHub Issues, and it really looks awesome, actually. Looks like there's going to be a lot of power behind what you can go and do. Editing things in bulk, for example, being able to kind of split things out and being able to link things together. It looks really interesting how it's going to build upon this existing GitHub Issues concept. And right now you can use GitHub Issues, you can create a new GitHub issue, but it's quite freeform in terms of text. One of the things they're also bringing into GitHub Issues is structured forms, so that you can go ahead and structure what people go and add to your content or to your issues as well. So there's a lot of investment happening in the GitHub Issues space. So definitely an area to watch. And that announcement, I think, came within the last 6 weeks, if I remember rightly. So this is all very fresh and very up and coming, and I'm not in the preview yet. So I'm looking forward to getting a chance to get onto that. So that's GitHub Issues and GitHub Projects. That is kind of how I go ahead and work with the content and work with the things and plan what I'm working on here. You can go ahead and link your GitHub Issues to pull requests as well. So let's just go through the process for a moment of making a change to the website. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and say, I'm going to create a new branch. So a branch inside of Git or in version control in general, really the idea is you're setting up a separate silo, a separate working area, so that my changes that I make don't impact any other developers. Other developers can be productive. My changes will happen in isolation. I'm not impacting anyone else here. So I'm going to go ahead and do this on the preview branch. And I'm going to go into my content. I'm going to go to my episode. And I'm going to go find the, sorry, not episode. I'm going to go to talks. I'm going to go and find Azure Thames Valley. There it is. We're going to go and edit that. So again, it's just like editing Markdown, nothing particularly special here. I can go ahead, for example, and remove that upcoming equals true here. And we can go ahead and commit that change. That is awesome. But you know, that's fine. I did it in the web browser. Great. But what if I could go ahead and use something like Visual Studio Code? One better, what if I could go ahead and use something like Visual Studio Code, or, you know, use it on my iPad, for example? Well, there's this awesome service as part of GitHub called GitHub Codespaces. And you'll see what I'm doing here is I've just quite literally went to my GitHub repository. If I can go and use the address bar, I can't type with everyone watching. There we go. Go to the code button here, click on this open with code spaces item, and then select the particular branch that I'm already editing that I want to go and work on here. Now, this is still in preview. You need to request access to the preview. There is a waiting list. So if you're interested, go ahead and take a look at that. But as you'll see in a moment, when the code space actually spins up and connects, and it might take a moment because it's a container in the back end which is creating. Here we go. You can see that this just looks exactly like Visual Studio Code. Like if I didn't mouse up at the top here, and you saw my address bar and all the different tabs I've got open, you would probably not even realize that that wasn't Visual Studio Code. And I can do everything that I'm used to. I have all of my extensions, for example, installed. I can go and use my CodeQL extension, for example. I could even use GitHub Copilot because I'm on the preview for that, for example. I could go and use that here. I can go and be productive in my environment here. So I have a full development environment just in my web browser. So I can go ahead and use my iPad or my phone or whatever kind of device you might want to use, which maybe you can't install VS Code or Visual Studio or whatever IDE you like to use. So GitHub Codespaces allows you to go and make those changes with the tools that you want to be productive with. So I'm a big fan of Codespaces. I normally go ahead and use this for my day-to-day development with Cloud with Chris, actually. So big fan of Codespaces. Best part, as the car goes past, if you go ahead and use Visual Studio Code locally, you can even connect to Codespaces from your local Visual Studio Code instance as well. So think about this for a moment. You're a new developer on a project, Cloud with Chris. You don't have Hugo installed. You don't have Node installed. You don't have all of the dependencies that Cloud with Chris has that you need to install on your machine. The way that Codespaces works is in the .github folder here, you have .dev container, I should say, I beg your pardon, a Docker file and a dev container.json, which specify how that environment should be created. So I've got a Docker file that basically says, this is what I need to be installed. Go and install that stuff in this container. And then this effectively says, here is what we want that environment to look like. Here are the things you should run once the container is created and built and ready to go. So no longer do you need to install a ton of dependencies and a ton of different tools on your local environment, on your local machine. You can be productive within seconds by just going ahead and creating one of these dev container.json files, a Docker file, and using something like GitHub Codespaces and Visual Studio Code. If you've used Visual Studio Code remote containers, that extension, it's the exact same kind of technology, the exact same logic. It's that dev containers approach, which is how all of this kind of hangs together and works. So just wants to call out about GitHub Codespaces because it's an awesome, awesome service, which I think everyone should be aware of at least, because I think it's really going to be making people productive. So we've talked about the code side of things. We've talked about editing in the browser. We've talked about editing with GitHub Codespaces. We've talked about GitHub issues. We've talked about projects as well. We can see that we've got this big pull request that we need to go and take a look at. So let's go ahead and compare that pull request and take a look. So my master branch, and I do need to rename that to main. It's something I haven't done yet. But my master branch is my production environment effectively. So as soon as code gets to master, that's effectively my production code, if you want to think about it that way. I do have a dev branch, and that is my staging environment that we saw a little bit earlier. So we're not going to merge straight to the production. We're going to go ahead. We're going to go from preview into our dev branch here. So we'll go and create that pull request. So you can see that we've got that commit here, the edit that we made a moment ago. But notice a couple of things that are just popped up further below this screen. So as I'm trying to make the request to merge that code into that other branch, so integrate that code, at this point, we're in this kind of continuous integration step, bringing those changes into another branch. We're going ahead and executing this pull request. And you can see that a couple of things have gone and lit up here. We've got a couple of ticks going on. We've got this kind of amber kind of also sign going on here saying something is happening there, something's in progress. These are actually GitHub Actions, and this is using something called the GitHub Checks API so that it can go ahead and show this right within my pull request. So if we go ahead and look at GitHub Actions at the top tab here, you will see that this preview GitHub Action workflow is running. So one of those steps actually went ahead and succeeded. It's now going ahead, linting my code base, checking that it's conformance to a certain standard that I have gone ahead and specified ahead of time. So you'll see here what we can do is it's pulling in a Docker image actually to go and run this one. So what it'll then go and do is pull those different image layers, check out the code, and then I'll go ahead and run that container image to lint my code base there. And just like you're used to with GitLab, Azure Pipelines, and the like, you get access to those logs in real time, so you can see exactly what is going on as part of that process. I'm using the hosted GitHub Action runners. I'm not self-hosting any of mine because everything that I need, I can either install on the runner or I can pull down as an image or do what I need there. So you can see that I've got a number of different workflows, I should say, going on the left-hand side. So the one we looked at was the preview one here. Here we go. This preview one. I've got a few different workflows here, and I just want to dwell on this for a moment because this is really one of the great secret powers of GitHub Actions. Notice that when earlier in the presentation, and if you listen to the recording, go back and fact check me because I definitely said this, is I talk about GitHub Actions being automation and CI/CD. It's not just about CI/CD. So yes, you can go ahead and do things like on a commit, go ahead and trigger a GitHub Action workflow to run, or on a pull request, or whatever kind of scenario you want to go ahead and do there within a more traditional CI/CD world. I can also go ahead and do it, for example, on a comment to a GitHub issue, on the change of a milestone of a GitHub issue, on the tag of a GitHub issue, on a GitHub discussion, on a particular cadence, a recurring schedule, for example. There's so many different things that you could go ahead and do with GitHub Actions. As an example, you saw in my project board that my episode roadmap has all of my episodes in there. That's not functionality from GitHub out of the box. That's not something I go and manually do, as fun as it would be to add every single issue that I need to on that project board. I've used GitHub Actions to go and populate that on my behalf. Something we'll look at a bit later once we've looked at how GitHub Actions works is actually all of my podcast audio files, my MP3 files. All of those are uploaded to my blob storage account and to be streamed then effectively by Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts is done through a GitHub action. I cross-post my content to Dev2 and to Medium.com by using a GitHub action through code that I've written. So there's loads of different ways that I've gone ahead and used GitHub Actions to automate my workflow on Cloud with Chris. So let's go ahead and figure out what's going on here, because we've got these GitHub Action workflows on the left-hand side. We've got these runs on the right-hand side, these instances of these workflows. How did we define this workflow? What is actually going on here? We've got all these workflows, but where are they? Well, you'll notice in my folder here in the main repository, I've got this .github folder. If we go and click on that, you'll see we've got this workflows folder. Click into that, and you'll see I have a number of these different YAML files here. So yes, once again, YAML. This time we're not talking about Markdown though. We are talking about YAML. And what you can see in here is these are effectively the different definitions of my workflow files. So for example, we would have triggered earlier the preview workflow. I sometimes call them pipelines. Excuse me for that if I do slip. That's me used with my Azure Pipelines experience that I'm used to. But you'll see here, this looks, and again, if you have used Azure Pipelines, in fact, the YAML looks and feels similar, not quite exactly the same, but it does feel similar. So you've got the name of your workflow, what the trigger is, for example. So what is the trigger, I guess. What is the thing that you're triggering on? That's why you've got that on keyword there. So a pull request on the branch to dev, for example. Then you've got your different jobs. So we've got the compressor stage that we saw a bit earlier, the compressing the images, the linting stage. And then I've got my build stage, which depends on those previous two. And then we've got the publish stage. Now, to make this a bit easier, we're going to jump back to the PowerPoint just for a moment. And we're just going to inspect the schema and some of the notable pieces of these GitHub Action workflow files. Before we do, just want to pause a sec. Have there been any questions so far? Have I got everyone still with me? Seeing typing in the chat, which is good. So far, so good. Excellent. Good. Again, any questions, folks, please feel free to jump right in as you feel. So, key points to be aware of with this workflow schema here. The key bit I've already called out, but really to drive the point home, GitHub Actions is not just CI/CD. It's not just about a commit or a push. It's not just about a pull request. You can trigger based upon GitHub issues or GitHub project boards or schedules or GitHub discussions, for example. That came in very recently. You can trigger on all of those things. So you can start automating your workflows. Now, if you think about being an open source project maintainer, you're in a world, or even an internal project that you're using within your enterprise, there are going to be things which take up time, which you don't want to take up time. Responding to people, first comments, for example, going ahead and thanking people for feedback, closing comments if they're very similar to something else, for example, all of that kind of maintenance. Imagine if you could automate some of that with a GitHub action. Well, you're a step closer because the triggers are now there for you to go and do that. This runs on property. I mentioned a bit earlier that similarly to Azure pipelines, that you have these kind of hosted runners. Well, exactly the same with Azure pipelines, you have these different types of runners. So you have Ubuntu, you have Windows, you have Mac. You can go ahead and run across those different types. So if you need to go and build your software across Mac, Windows, and Linux, you can do a matrix build and run that across all of those different jobs at once if you need to. So that is absolutely possible, absolutely something you can do. There's a lot of power in there for you. Now, before we go to this next one, I want to ask a question here. And this I will stop before I progress because I'd love to see what people's thoughts are here. What do you see between this one and this line here? What is the similarity? What is the significance of that format there, of that naming convention? So we have, this first bit here, and a slash, and then this bit here then. Can anyone at all? There we go. Stephen's got it. And you are the first person, Stephen, to get that in one of my talks. So if I had swag and we were in person, you would be getting swag at this point. So apologies that we're not in person, but you get the satisfaction of being that first person there. So awesome, awesome work. They are all repositories. And that is what is the beauty of GitHub Actions, is you are just pulling in other repositories. So check this out. Actions, great pun there, checkout. Let's check out the GitHub Actions checkouts repository here. So just going to go github.com/actions/checkout. It's a GitHub repository. It's nothing special as a GitHub repository. It is just a Git repository. So hold on. Chris, you just said it's a GitHub repository. What about this @v2 thing going on at the end here? What is all of that about? Well, notice on GitHub repositories, you have releases as well. And all of these releases have a version tag. So if we just scroll down, we will see that there is a tag for v2. So what we're saying by using this action here, action/checkout @v2, is we're saying, hey, GitHub Actions, the platform, go ahead and use this action or this task effectively at this point in time of the repository. So when you think about the power and the potential of GitHub Actions as a platform, it's huge because anybody can go ahead and commit and make their own GitHub action. For example, this guy I know called Chris Reddington, for example, he went ahead and made this Hugo Cross poster GitHub action. So that is actually how I go ahead and cross-post my content either to Medium or Dev2. I've just got a simple .NET Core project which runs as a console app. I happen to execute it as a GitHub action. It runs in a container image, and it just goes ahead, takes the Markdown files that it can find, and pushes those out to the relevant APIs for me. So, the creativity of what you can do with GitHub Actions is quite interesting there, because you can go ahead and make the action yourself here. And I'm not going to go into depth about how you make those actions. There's lots of great content and documentation on there how to go and do that. But the important part is just recognizing that is how GitHub Actions works. Great power comes great responsibility. Those GitHub Actions, like I mentioned a bit earlier, I haven't gone ahead and published that to the marketplace yet. But I could go and draft a release and publish that to the marketplace if I wanted. So just like any kind of dependency that you're taking in your project, like your NuGet packages or whatever package management tool, NPM, for example, that you may be using in your own project, you want to make sure that you are sure what is in that project, that you're not taking dependencies on something that you don't trust. Do you trust what Chris Reddington has gone and written and put in that source control? Well, you can go ahead and check out my code. It's not the not going to say it's my best ever work, but you can go ahead and check out that code if you so wish, and check out what's going on there. So just do your due diligence is what I'm saying there. If you are going to take some dependencies, just be mindful of that. But on the flip side, it's open source, so anyone could go and call anyone out if there is anything malicious going on in there. So that is the benefit, again, of how this model works here. So in terms of the remaining pieces, once again, we've got these users statements here for identifying what GitHub action we want to go and use here. We've got the runs on here as well. But notice we've got this kind of environments thing going on. So keep that in your mind, because we're going to look at environments in a little bit. We've got the GitHub Actions. We've looked at those already here. And notice this other thing as well. So we've got this $ curly brace syntax, as you can see. And that is our way of referencing expressions, referencing kind of variables, things that need to be evaluated at runtime. So you can see that in my workflow, what I am doing is I am referencing a secret called Azure_credentials. So let's go ahead and see in action really what is actually going on here then. So if we jump back to my cloudwithchris.com repository, let's jump into the preview workflow file again here and just have a look at what's going on and just zoom in a bit. So once again, this is probably going to make a bit more sense now. We've got our GitHub action workflow file. It's called preview. It's going to trigger based on a pull request to the dev branch. So I think it will have run because we did trigger the pull request. We have got a image actions action that we're running, or sorry, stage, I should say, or job. We're running it on Ubuntu latest, and it has these steps. We're checking out the repository using that GitHub action repository we saw a bit earlier. We're going ahead and using this create pull request action if certain checks are met. So conditionally doing that. And then we do some pieces in there then. Next, then we go ahead and have the linting job. We go ahead, use that GitHub action there to go and do that. So you can see how this starts piecing together and coming together. Now notice that we have here this with credentials and the secrets.azure_credentials. And then to upload the content to my Azure Blob storage, all I'm doing is using the Azure CLI and pushing that content up to my blob storage accounts to a certain folder or container inside of that blob storage. That is all that I'm doing there. So where does that secret credential come from? What is going on there? If we click on settings, and if we jump down here, you will see that we have a couple of options on the left-hand side. We have secrets and we have environments. So if we click on secrets, you will see that I have several different secrets going on here. So for example, if we jump up to environments a moment first, you will see that I have a number of different environments. So in that previous workflow file, if we jump back a sec, just take a look at that one more time. We look for environments, you will see I have specified that preview.azure environment there. And this was exactly the same as in Azure Pipelines. If you specify that environment and you map it to the environments concept in Azure Pipelines, then you can map what's in here, the rules effectively, to that particular job. So what we're saying then is preview.azure is going to use this Azure_credentials secret. So if I don't specify preview.azure, that environment in my YAML file, it's not going to go ahead and pull in those credentials. So those credentials are only pulled in if a workflow file has specified that we need to go and use them. Otherwise, if you had your secrets stored as repository secrets, well, they're going to be pulled in on every single workflow run because GitHub Actions is going to assume that it needs access to those secrets on every single run. So from a principle of least privilege perspective and control, scoping those to a particular environment is a good practice and something you should do. And you can see it follows suit here, right? So I've got different environments. I've got my production.azure, staging.azure. I am doing multi-cloud deployments. So I've got AWS, I've got GCP, I've got Azure as well, for example. And I've got an environment for my cross-posting. So even my API keys for Medium and for Dev2, those are also stored as secrets in there as well. Yes, I could go and pull them from Azure Key Vault or something similar. That would also absolutely be an option. But for me, what I do with Cloud with Chris, that is good enough for me. I don't have those requirements. Presumably, those secrets themselves are stored in Azure Key Vault. I have not stored those in Azure Key Vault, Richard. How those are stored under the covers by GitHub, I don't know the implementation detail, in all honesty, and I'm not sure that is actually publicly documented. I think that is something that, as a platform, you kind of trust how they are stored. I'm not sure if the details there. I might need to go and double check on that one. But there's no reason you couldn't store those in an Azure Key Vault and use something like, I believe there is an Azure Key Vault GitHub action to download those secrets and bring those in to be used then in that workflow run. So you could absolutely go and do that as an option as well. So to complete the story, complete the picture, we can go ahead. We can see that all the checks have passed. So that is awesome. Let's go and merge that into our dev environment. But we're rockstar developers. We know that our code is rock solid, battle hardened. So we're just going to go ahead. We're going to go and add another pull request here. Add that to, or create that pull request, I should say. And we don't need to wait for checks. We're an admin. We're happy that everything is working as expected. So we're going to go and confirm that merge into master, because what can go wrong? Nothing can go wrong without any checks to master, right? Don't do as I do, folks. Please do wait for the checks, but just for the purposes of this, we're going to go and accelerate that one here. So again, you can see a number of those different workflow runs now running here. What you will now see, interestingly about my master environment, is I have approvals set up on that production.azure environment. So before going and doing that release stage effectively, I've got to go ahead and review that before it goes to production. So if we jump to that GitHub action, jump to this run, you will see here that the build job here is running just fine. So why is that? Well, if we jump to the master workflow file here we go. You will see the build does not have an environment associated with it. Whereas my publish stage or my publish job has the production.azure environment associated with it. So because this environment is associated, we need to go ahead and make sure that that check has taken place. Now, of course, making sure that you have the protections on the code to make sure people can't remove those environment associations is really key. So doing things like your kind of pull request policies and making sure people have to do pull requests before making changes is an important kind of governance piece there. So once we jump over here, we should see very, very soon that that content is going to get uploaded to a web artifact inside of GitHub, which means now I jump back to my action. We can see there's now this kind of clock looking icon saying, hey, this is pending approval. So I can go ahead if I want, go and take a look at the artifacts here. So if I just zoom out a bit, this I think looks good. I can go and check the logs here. This all seems fine. I could go and just inspect things if I wanted, but actually I'm happy. I'm going to go and approve that deployment. And what it's going to start doing now is uploading the new generated HTML, CSS, JavaScript, images, etc. to my Blob Storage account. So the first thing it's going to do is it's going to use the Azure Login task that is available as a GitHub action. Use the credentials that are stored in those secrets that we saw a little bit earlier. It then uses that login to go ahead and upload based upon that context on that and login that it's logged in with. I think it's a service principal that I've got there, if I remember rightly. It's going to use that context to upload the files to blob storage. And then it's going to purge my CDN. And that is my publish stage. Now, for anyone that's interested on the static web apps front, the way that it works with static web apps is if you go ahead and create a static web app in the Azure portal, and let's actually jump over to the Azure portal here. There we go. If I jump across to one of my static web apps for a moment, there we go. So you can see what this looks like. That one, there we go. So this is the different service now. This is not Azure Storage. This is Azure Static Web Apps, which went generally available in May timeframe. You'll notice that I have a link to some kind of website here that I can go and view the latest deployments. My website breaks a little because I've hard-coded a few links, so don't worry about that. Everything is working exactly as it should. But what you'll also see, like I mentioned a bit earlier about those different environments, you can see I can access those different staging environments here if I want to. So I can view earlier versions of my website if I really want to go and do that. I can also go and do things like deploy Azure Functions as part of that static web apps deployment. I can go and add authentication or authorization to that website. So say, for example, I want Azure AD authorization or GitHub or Facebook. I can go and do that through static web apps. That's something I can't do through the static content in Azure Storage. We've got these two different hosting plans, the free version and the standard plan. And you can see some of the different ways or different comparisons there you may need of that. But even the standard is about £7 a month, right? So we're not talking, you know, big bucks or big dollars to go and deploy those pieces. The beauty of this static web app piece is when you go and create it, let's just go and pretend we're going to create one here. We'll just go to Azure Thames Valley, Azure Thames Valley new. We'll go and deploy it in West Europe. You can see that I can select either GitHub or another source control. The other at the moment is Azure DevOps, and there's documented steps on how to kind of set that up for Azure DevOps and get that working. But you can sign up with GitHub just like this, super easily, continue. I'm going to go ahead and authorize. And I can log in with my GitHub account. And you can see it just allows me to go select Chris Reddington. Actually, maybe I want to select Cloud with Chris. We want to go for cloudwithchris.com. And we want to do that on master branch. That's how easy it is for me to kind of set this up. And I can go, right, I'm using Hugo, but look at all those other frameworks that we mentioned a bit earlier. I'm using Hugo. That's where my app is located. I don't have any APIs, so I don't need to go and use that. And let's go and output the build in a public folder. All of that GitHub YAML that you saw a bit earlier, the GitHub Actions workflow file, it will go ahead and create a file that looks like this. This is exactly what Azure Static Web Apps committed to my repository on a previous static web app that I created. So you can see all of that logic and all of that heartache and hardship that I had to go through to create Cloud with Chris before static web apps existed is now all dealt with for me. So if static web apps was around before I created Cloud with Chris, absolutely, I would have went straight to that because it is a really awesome service, and I encourage you to go and use that there. So with that, conscious of our time and kind of wrapping us up here, the final thing that I want to do here is just draw your attention to a couple of things, because even though this has been a bit of an extended talk, and one thing actually before we go to that, I did say I'll go and look at a bit more of how I do it on Cloud with Chris. One final thing just to leave you with about how it can be fun to do these things with GitHub Actions. I mentioned about I also upload all of my podcast MP3 files. So on the face of it, anyone listening in here might think, hold on, you're storing MP3 files in a version control system that is typically used for source code. That to me sounds like a big anti-pattern. Why on earth would you go and store big files, binaries inside of a version control system? Could be another talk in its own right, but in a nutshell, I'm using something called GitLFS, large file storage. What that means, anytime an MP3 file is uploaded to GitHub, it doesn't store it in the version control directly. It stores it somewhere else, in some kind of storage bucket somewhere. And what's stored in the version control is a pointer to that place. So it's actually a Git kind of practice. It's a way of kind of hosting those large files. And what I have in my YAML here is effectively a bash script. And what this bash script does is looks at the previous Git commits to that branch effectively, looks at the current one and goes, right, have any MP3 files changed in between these previous commits? So what's the delta? And if there is a delta, let's go ahead and take that MP3 file. And then what I do is I have a list of MP3 files that I want to go and upload to Azure Storage. Because what I did in the past was all manual. It was very long-winded. It was very error-prone. And I made mistakes. There were a load of MP3 files that were not uploaded. And it wasn't a great experience for my listeners. So now this experience makes sure that I never miss a single MP3 upload, because it is part of my process for releasing my content and releasing my new pages on my website. So just want to show that's how I've integrated the MP3 file release process as part of my GitHub Action workflow file there as well. Again, could be a completely separate talk, but that's it in a nutshell. So how to learn more? Because even though this is the extended version, this really has been scraping the surface here, folks. Number one, lab.github.com. Really, really, really awesome set of labs that you can go and interact with. All free, all hands-on, all practical. And the way they work is you give GitHub access to go and create things on behalf of you in repositories on your account. And you have to follow then a series of kind of tasks and self-guided learning materials then. So it's not like you're reading a doc and then you have to go and carry something else. It's very interactive in the way it works. And it's all the way from the basics of Git, the basics of GitHub, all the way to things like what is CodeQL, what is Dependabot, and very advanced security techniques as part of your DevOps workflows there. So really awesome. Check that one out. Another one is Microsoft Learn. Honestly, take anything away, forget all of my rambling for however long we've been talking. Take away these two links, lab.github.com and Microsoft Learn, because Microsoft Learn is another great tool from Microsoft. So if you want to learn about static web apps, Azure Storage, Azure Fundamentals, even Python, I learned last week. I didn't even realize there was tons of Python content on Microsoft Learn. There is probably content there. There's so much investment happening in Microsoft Learn, not just about static kind of content that you're reading and just consuming and learning that way. There's interactive task-based content on there as well that you can go and complete. Also scenario-based stuff based upon whether you're a DevOps engineer, an administrator, a developer, an architect, all on there. So definitely go and check out Microsoft Learn. And also check out cloudwithchris.com, because I don't just do meetup talks. I release content at least once, if not twice a week, normally a couple of blog posts if I can keep up as well. Static web apps, DevOps are all things that I talk about. In fact, I released today a 6-minute video on what is continuous integration for anyone who is not a developer. So go ahead, please check that out. Please subscribe on YouTube as well. Always appreciate that. So with that, I've done enough talking. Any questions here, folks, at all? Please jump off mute. Please jump in the chat and ask away.
I don't have access to the chat. My Teams has been acting up all day, so I think it's been a bit weird. But I just wanted your breakdown of the YAML docs, like the YAML file that goes in earlier was really good, because that's something I've been struggling with over the kind of past week or so. I think just the way you kind of bolded like the name of the step and then it needs it, like that was something that I totally, I don't know why I found it so difficult, and then I had a kind of eureka moment over something really simple, but I feel like your slide kind of really showed it off pretty well.
Awesome.
But yeah, no, fantastic chat. Absolutely loved it. I'll be trying to dive into a wee bit more detail now.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'll be honest, it wasn't one of the things that immediately jumped out to me either, Nicola. Like, I think it was as I was kind of playing around with it more and more, and you start seeing there is this repository, and as soon as you can kind of get that tag and that it's linking to a commit, the magic then kind of all makes sense. You're like, oh wow.
Yeah, and it wasn't until I paired up the YAML file with the actions that were actually flowing through Git, and I'm like, oh, it all makes sense now. And I think a lot of the tutorials use the word build as like the first step, and when I see the word build, I automatically jump to it being like a built-in command kind of thing. So yeah, no, it was that was pretty cool.
And this is the other trick as well. I think that's how I initially spotted it, was when it says setup job in your action workflow there. Literally one of the things it's doing is downloading all of the actions that it needs to go and run the thing it wants to go and do. So it's pretty much just pulling down those repositories and the code it needs to go and do that activity then. So really, really clever. Yeah. Awesome. Any other questions, folks? I'm on Twitter. If you want to carry on the discussion there, please do. And you know where to find me on a YouTube channel near you. Otherwise, I think, Alicia, I will context switch and bring that back up.
Thank you. I think if you just go on to the next slide, we've just got a slide there for questions. If anybody else has any other questions or comments, this is the time to share. No, all right, let's go to the next slide, Chris. So just to let everybody know, we're not going to have a meetup in August. We're going to take a little bit of time to take a break. I think Chris is going away on a much deserved holiday. What we are going to be back on the 21st of September though, with an evening of lightning talks. If you or anyone you know would like to submit a proposal for a lightning talk, please go ahead and submit that on our Sessionize page. I did share the link earlier. I can do that again before we leave for the day. Thanks, Chris. And then back to the next slide or the next slide. Okay, and then just to remind you to please use our Sessionize page to submit any talks. We've got the lightning talks coming up in September, and then just to follow us on all of our social media pages, which I shared earlier. Thank you. That's all from me.
Awesome.
Anyone?
I guess, folks, I know it's very hot. I know we probably don't want to stick around for much kind of socializing and networking this evening, but we'd love, every session, right, we run one of these. We'd love just to know any feedback, anything you'd love to see more of, anything that you want us to bring as topics or try and get certain speakers. We would love your feedback. So please do give us a shout. Is there anything at all you'd like to see come up in these sessions?
I think someone wanted you to do a more in-depth GitHub one earlier.
I can certainly go
a
deeper.
Deep dive.
Absolutely, I can do that. No problem. But I think the real thing, just to call out as well about the lightning talks, just to really emphasize that one just before we close out. Honestly, we do not care who you are. We do not care what your background is. We do not care whether you're a developer, an infrastructure person, a data person, whether you've just started learning Azure, whether you've been using Azure for the last 5 years or more, whether you're a partner, whether you're a Microsoft employee, whether you are just, you work at a company that's building on Azure. All of us have a story to tell. All of us have things to share with the community. And this is absolutely a safe space. Even if you've always thought of, hey, I want to get into that public speaking thing. I've never really wanted to do a full hour-long talk. Lightning talks are 20 minutes long, roughly 15, 20 minutes. Great opportunity to try your hands at the speaking side of it. And, we certainly want to carry those forward in these future sessions as well. So having a bit of a lightning talk before the main session. So please do submit. We'd love to see some more nominations in there. And we'll be starting to look at those over August. So hopefully we'll see some of your names in there, folks. Otherwise, Alicia, I think we can close out today because it's warm and I think people need drinks and food and rest and time in the sun.
Go and have a glass of rosé in the garden.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your evenings, and hopefully we'll see you on another session very, very soon.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Awesome. Cheers.
Take care.